Imagine this. A billionaire CEO, sitting alone in a fancy restaurant, completely unaware that four furious men have just walked in, looking for her, ready to explode. What happens next will shock you. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The quiet waiter, a single dad who's been hiding a dark secret for 3 years, is about to step in, and his hidden skill will change everything. Stay with me, because this true story moment is wild. At Lumiere, Elena Park, the billionaire CEO known for her ice-cold decisions, sat alone at her usual corner table. She never noticed the 4 men who walked through the door that Friday night. They weren't there for dinner. Their eyes locked onto her with unmistakable rage, and they moved with the kind of collective tension that comes right before violence. In that moment, the quiet waiter, Daniel Cole, a single father who'd kept his past buried for 3 years, had to make a choice. What he did next surprised everyone, including himself. The warm glow of chandeliers cast soft shadows across white tablecloths at Lumiere. Friday nights brought the usual crowd, executives celebrating deals, couples dressed for anniversaries, voices kept low beneath the gentle drift of jazz piano. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a glass tower downtown. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled in. Daniel Cole moved between tables with the kind of quiet efficiency that made him nearly invisible. He'd worked the Friday dinner shift for 3 years now, 7 until 11, and he knew the rhythm by heart. Refill water glasses before they're half empty. Clear plates from the right. Smile politely, but don't linger. The job paid enough to cover rent and his daughter's school expenses, and it let him pick Lily up from her after-school program every afternoon before his shift started. He was 35, but looked older when he was tired. Broad shoulders that he kept slightly hunched, brown hair that needed cutting, a beard he'd grown to look different from the clean-shaven officer he'd been years ago. Most customers never really looked at him. That suited him fine. Elena Park arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, same as always. Daniel watched her hand her coat to the hostess and make her way to table 12 in the far corner. She came twice a week, always alone, always in a dark suit that looked expensive, even from across the room. Her black hair was pulled back tight, and she carried herself like someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary movements. Daniel had served her maybe 20 times over the past year. She ordered efficiently, ate quickly, and left generous tips without making eye contact. He appreciated that she never tried to make conversation. Some customers seemed to think waiters existed for therapy sessions or flirting. Elena Park treated the interaction like a transaction, which was the most respectful thing she could do. He brought her the usual bottle of sparkling water without being asked. She glanced up briefly, gave a small nod, and returned her attention to the iPad propped against the table's small vase of white orchids. Her fingers moved across the screen with the kind of focused intensity that suggested whatever she was reading wasn't going well. Daniel moved back toward the service station near the kitchen doors. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out carefully, checking that Mr. Lauren wasn't watching from the host stand. The text was from his daughter. "Dad, can you come home early tonight?" He typed back quickly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just miss you." Daniel felt the familiar tug in his chest. Lily was 7 now, old enough to understand that he worked nights, but young enough to still want him home for bedtime stories. He glanced at the clock above the bar. 3 hours left on his shift. "I'll be home by 11:30. Love you?" "Love you too." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and picked up the tray of appetizers waiting under the heat lamp. Table 7. A group of lawyers celebrating something, their laughter getting louder with each round of drinks. He delivered their calamari with the same polite smile he perfected, then retreated before they could pull him into their conversation. The front door opened. Daniel's attention shifted automatically. Part of the job was tracking new arrivals, anticipating who'd need menus, who'd head straight for the bar. 4 men stepped inside. They weren't dressed for Lumiere. Jeans and work jackets, one of them in a faded Carhartt coat with paint stains on the sleeves. The hostess approached them with her professional smile, but something in their body language made Daniel stop moving. They weren't looking at her. Their eyes scanned the dining room like they were searching for something specific. One of them, the tallest with graying hair and a hard jaw, spotted Elena Park's table, and his expression shifted into something sharp and cold. Daniel felt a familiar sensation crawl up his spine. It was the same alert he used to get on patrol, the instinct that separated routine calls from situations about to turn dangerous. He tried to bury that instinct when he left the police department 3 years ago, but apparently it hadn't gone anywhere. The 4 men moved past the hostess without waiting to be seated. They took a table near Elena's, 4 chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Other diners glanced over with mild irritation. The men didn't open their menus. They just sat there, 3 of them facing Elena's direction, voices low and tense. Daniel picked up a water pitcher and moved closer, using the excuse of refilling glasses at a nearby table. He kept his movements casual, but positioned himself where he could hear fragments of their conversation. "That's her," the tall one with gray hair said. His voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "Park Ventures. That's the CEO. You sure?" Another man, younger, with nervous energy in his hands. "I memorized her face from the news. That's Elena Park." The third man leaned forward. "So what do we do? Just sit here?" "We let her know. We let her see what her decisions cost." Daniel's grip tightened on the water pitcher. He looked at Elena. She was still focused on her screen, completely unaware. The soft lighting made her look almost fragile despite the severity of her expression, like someone who'd learned to armor themselves against a world that kept hitting back. He needed to think. These men weren't here for dinner. Their energy was all wrong. The kind of collective tension that comes before violence. But what could he do? Call Mr. Lauren? Get them kicked out based on a feeling? They hadn't done anything yet. Except Daniel had seen this before. The stillness before the storm. The way angry men gathered courage from each other until someone made the first move. And then the tall one, the leader, looked directly at Daniel. Their eyes met for 2 seconds. Something flickered across the man's face. Recognition. Daniel's heart rate climbed. He looked away and moved back toward the kitchen, mind racing. He remembered them now. A bar fight at a place called Rosie's on the south side 5 years ago. Daniel had been first on scene as a patrol officer. Broke it up before anyone got seriously hurt. They'd all been arrested, spent a night in jail, paid fines. Nothing major. But the tall one, Marcus, that was his name, had looked at Daniel during booking and said something. "I don't forget faces, Officer Cole." Daniel forced himself to breathe normally. Maybe Marcus didn't recognize him. Different hair, the beard 30 pounds heavier. But even if Marcus did remember, this wasn't about Daniel. This was about Elena Park. One of the 4 men stood up. The younger one, nervous energy barely contained. He walked toward Elena's table. Daniel's body moved before his mind caught up. He cut across the dining room, intercepting the man 3 steps before he reached Elena. "Sir, can I help you with something?" Daniel kept his voice light, professional, but positioned himself directly in the man's path. The man stopped. Up close, Daniel could see the desperation in his eyes, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights. "I need to talk to her. If you'd like to speak with another guest, I can pass along a message." Daniel didn't move aside. "Just get out of my way." Elena looked up from her iPad, finally noticing the confrontation. Her expression shifted from confusion to something more guarded. Marcus stood up from his table. The other 2 followed. Daniel felt the situation crystallizing into something he couldn't walk away from. 4 against 1. A room full of civilians. A woman who had no idea she was in danger. All his training said to de-escalate, create distance. But there was no backup here. Just him. A water pitcher still in his hand. And 3 years of rust on skills he tried to forget. Marcus walked over. And now Daniel could see the recognition settling fully into place on the man's face. "Wait, I know you." Daniel met his eyes. There was no point in lying. "You should go back to your table. You're that cop, Cole." Daniel Cole. Marcus' voice rose slightly. You arrested us, Rosie's bar 5 years ago. The other men looked at Daniel with new attention. The young one stepped back slightly, suddenly uncertain. But Marcus moved closer. Small world, Marcus said. His tone carried something between surprise and bitterness. You're a waiter now. What happened? They fire you? Daniel didn't respond. He could feel Elena's eyes on him, calculating, trying to understand what was happening. I asked you a question? Marcus's voice hardened. I left the force. Daniel kept his tone neutral. Now I'm asking you to sit down or leave the restaurant. You're disturbing other guests. Disturbing? One of the other men laughed bitterly. That's rich. You know what's disturbing? Losing your job because some billionaire pulls their money out of your factory. 200 people unemployed. But sure, we're the problem because we're a little loud. Elena stood up from her table. What is this about? Marcus turned to face her fully. You don't even know, do you, Park Ventures? You pulled your investment from Morrison Manufacturing 8 months ago. You remember that decision? Elena's expression remained controlled, but Daniel saw the slight tension in her shoulders. That's business. The project wasn't profitable. Business. Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. You sit here in your $1,000 suit, eating meals that cost more than my weekly unemployment check, and you call it business? The young man found his courage again. My wife left me because I couldn't pay the mortgage. You want to call that business too? Daniel raised his hand slightly, a calming gesture. I understand you're angry, but this isn't the place. Marcus looked at him with something like pity. You understand? You're taking orders from people like her now. You really think you understand? For a brief moment, Daniel wondered if Marcus was right. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he'd taken the easy path, hiding in this job instead of facing the world that had broken him. But then he saw Elena's hand trembling slightly as she gripped her iPad. And he remembered why he'd walked away from police work in the first place. He was tired of watching people get hurt. Daniel's voice dropped lower, stripped of the polite server tone. It came out with the authority he'd carried for 8 years in uniform. If you want to talk, we can do this the right way. But you need to step back from her table now. The word hung in the air between them. Something in Daniel's posture had shifted without him meaning it to, shoulders squared, weight centered, hands relaxed but ready. The muscle memory of a man who knew how to handle conflict. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, Cole, let's talk. Daniel gestured toward the rear of the restaurant. There's a patio out back. We can talk there without disturbing anyone. The dining room had gone quiet. Other guests watched with the careful stillness of people trying not to get involved. Elena remained standing by her table, her expression unreadable. Daniel caught the eye of Sarah, another server working the floor. He tilted his head slightly toward the kitchen, their silent signal for trouble. She gave a barely perceptible nod and moved toward the back to alert the manager. The patio was technically a service area. A concrete square enclosed by brick walls where staff came to catch their breath between rushes. A few metal chairs sat scattered around a table someone had dragged out months ago. String lights hung overhead, half of them burned out. The cool night air carried the smell of grease from the kitchen vents. Daniel held the door open as the 4 men filed out. The young one kept glancing back at the dining room like he was already regretting this. The other 2, one built like a linebacker, the other lean with weathered hands, moved with the weary caution of men who'd learned to expect trouble. Marcus was the last to step outside. He stopped in front of Daniel. You really want to help us, or are you just protecting your rich customers? Daniel met his gaze. I want to stop this from getting worse. Too late for that. It's already worse. Has been for 8 months. The door closed behind them, muffling the restaurant noise. Out here, the city sounds took over, distant traffic, a siren several blocks away, the hum of air conditioning units. Daniel pulled out one of the metal chairs. Sit if you want. I can get coffee, water, whatever you need. We don't need coffee. Marcus stayed standing, arms crossed. We need that woman in there to understand what she did. The nervous young man finally spoke up. I'm Jimmy. Jimmy Torres. I worked at Morrison Manufacturing for 12 years. I was a welder. They put me on the specialty pieces, the custom orders that needed precision. I was proud of that work. Daniel could see the exhaustion carved into Jimmy's face, the kind that came from months of unemployment and shame. The linebacker sat down heavily. Carlos Mendez. I fixed the machines when they broke. 20 years in that factory. The lean man with weathered hands remained standing. Ray Sullivan. I ran the third shift. 52 people under my supervision. Daniel absorbed this information. These weren't career criminals. They were working men who'd been hollowed out by circumstance. Marcus pointed at Daniel. And you? You remember arresting us? I remember. You were professional about it. Didn't rough us up. Didn't talk down to us. That's the only reason we're out here talking instead of causing a real scene. Marcus's expression darkened. But don't think that means we trust you. You're still working for people like her. Ray spoke quietly. If we're sitting out here, we deserve to know who we're talking to. What happened to you? Why'd you leave the force? Daniel looked at the four of them. Part of him wanted to deflect, to keep his past buried, but another part was tired of hiding. I was with the Community Intervention Unit, he said. We handled situations where someone needed to de-escalate before violence happened. I thought I was good at it. He met their eyes. Then I got called to a domestic dispute. Husband had been drinking. Wife was scared. I talked to him. Thought I'd calmed him down. So I left. The night air felt colder. Daniel could see it all again. The small house. The woman's eyes asking him not to go, his own confidence that he'd handled it. 2 hours later, she was in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a fractured jaw. He'd waited until I left. Daniel's hands were flat on the table. I couldn't trust my judgment after that, so I turned in my badge. The silence that followed felt like understanding. Marcus finally sat down. So you get it? What it's like to lose the thing you were good at. I get it. Jimmy leaned forward. My wife left me 3 months ago, took our son. Every morning I'd get up, put on work clothes, pretend I was going to a job. I'd drive to the library and fill out applications for 8 hours. Then I'd come home like I'd been at work. Carlos shook his head. My daughter had to drop out of college. She works at Target now. She tells me it's fine, but I see how she looks at me, like I broke a promise. Ray's weathered hands were clasped together. When Morrison shut down, the 52 people on my shift asked me what to do next. They trusted me to have answers. He looked at Daniel. I didn't have any. Daniel felt the weight of their stories. This was what Elena Park couldn't see from her corner table. The human cost of business decisions. These men had built their identities around work that no longer existed. I understand why you're angry, Daniel said. But going after Elena Park won't fix anything. Marcus' jaw tightened. So we're supposed to just accept it? No, but there's a difference between making her listen and making her a target. You came here ready to intimidate her. That won't help. Jimmy stood up. We didn't threaten anyone. We just wanted her to see us. You wanted more than that, Daniel said quietly. And I get that impulse. But it won't help. The door from the restaurant opened. Elena Park stepped out onto the patio. Daniel stood immediately. Mississippi Park, you should go back inside. She ignored him, her attention fixed on the 4 men. I overheard part of your conversation. Morrison Manufacturing. I remember that decision. Marcus stood slowly. The other 3 did the same. Elena's voice remained steady. We pulled our investment because the factory was losing money. That's business reality. Business reality. Jimmy's voice cracked. You keep using that phrase like it absolves you. I'm stating facts. Carlos took a step forward. Here's a fact. 200 people lost their jobs. Not because they weren't working hard enough. Because you decided the numbers didn't look good enough. Elena's expression remained composed, but Daniel could see tension in her shoulders. She wasn't used to being confronted like this. Did you ever come to the factory? Ray asked quietly, before you pulled out. Did you ever meet the people working there? That's not how investment works. We reviewed data projections. So no, Ray interrupted. You never met us. We were just data to you. Something flickered across Elena's face. Maybe the first crack in her armor. If I visited every investment property, I'd never have time to run my company. But that's the point, Marcus said. You run a company. We had lives, and you treated our lives like they were disposable. Daniel moved between them. Mississippi Park, why did you come out here? She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd started serving her, he saw uncertainty in her eyes. Because the waiter who served me water for a year just revealed he used to be a police officer, she said. Because 4 men showed up claiming my decisions destroyed their lives. Because nothing about tonight makes sense. What makes sense, Marcus said, is that you're finally seeing the consequences of your choices. Elena turned to face him. And what were you planning to do before this man stopped you? The question hung in the air. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. We just wanted to talk, Jimmy finally said. You wanted to intimidate me, Elena corrected. 4 men approaching a woman dining alone. You knew exactly what that would feel like. Marcus's expression hardened. Good. You should know what it's like to have your security taken away. Daniel moved between them again. That's enough, Marcus. You said you wanted to talk. So talk. Tell her what you need. What I need. Marcus's voice rose. I need my job back. I need to be able to look my wife in the eye. I need to not wake up at 3 in the morning wondering how I'm going to pay the mortgage. I need to get my daughter back in college, Carlos added. Jimmy's voice was barely above a whisper. I need to stop pretending. Ray said nothing, but the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. Elena stood very still, processing this. Then something in her expression shifted. Not much, but enough for Daniel to notice. A softening around the eyes, a slight drop in her shoulders. I didn't know, she said finally. Marcus laughed bitterly. That's supposed to make it better. No, it's supposed to be the truth. Elena's composure cracked slightly. I sit in meetings and review spreadsheets and make decisions that seem logical on paper. I don't think about the people behind the numbers because if I did, I'd never be able to make hard choices. That's what I tell myself. She looked at Daniel. You asked why I came out here. I spend most of my time around people who either want something from me or are afraid of me. It's lonely. And when you stepped between me and these men, you weren't doing it for money or because I'm your boss. You did it because you thought it was right. I haven't seen that in a long time. The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised everyone else. Before anyone could respond, the patio door opened. Mr. Lauren stepped out, his expression tight with concern. He was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, radiating the authority of someone who ran an establishment where mistakes weren't tolerated. Daniel, what's going on here? His eyes took in the scene, the 4 men, Elena, the tension. Daniel felt his stomach drop. This was the moment where he'd get fired. There was a situation, Daniel said carefully. I brought it out here to handle it quietly. Mississippi Park, are you all right? Should I call the police? The word police made all 4 men tense. Even Marcus' bravado faltered. Elena looked at the 4 men, then at Daniel. When she spoke, her voice carried authority. No police. These men and I are having a conversation. Daniel was helping facilitate it. Mr. Lauren blinked. Mississippi Park, I really think. I said no police. Her CEO voice had returned. That's all. Mr. Lauren looked at Daniel. You're supposed to be working the floor. We have customers waiting. Daniel stays, Elena said. We're not finished. Mr. Lauren's expression suggested this entire situation was giving him a migraine. With all due respect, this is highly irregular. Which I'm sure can be covered by your other staff for a few more minutes, Elena said firmly. Mr. Loren gave them all one more disapproving look before retreating. The door clicked shut. Daniel knew they had maybe 10 minutes before the manager returned. We need to resolve this now, he said, looking at Marcus and his companions. You came here angry. You had every right to be. But now you need to decide what you actually want, revenge or a way forward. Then he turned to Elena. And you need to decide if you're willing to see these men as people instead of problems. The string lights overhead cast uneven shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a siren faded away. Elena broke the silence. I can't give you your jobs back. Morrison Manufacturing is closed. That decision is final. Marcus' expression darkened, but she held up a hand. But Park Ventures runs a workforce development program. We train people for new industries, help them transition to growing sectors. If you're willing to retrain, I can get you into the program. It covers tuition and provides a stipend during training. Jimmy looked skeptical. What kind of training? Renewable energy installation, advanced manufacturing, logistics management. Depends on your background and what's available. Why would you do that? Carlos asked. Elena met his eyes. Because tonight someone reminded me that behind every business decision are human beings, and because making this offer costs me less than living with the knowledge that I could have helped and chose not to. Ray spoke quietly. The 52 people from my shift, can they join too? Yes. Marcus still looked skeptical, arms crossed, but Daniel could see something shifting in his expression, not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of hope fighting against bitterness. And what do you get out of this? Marcus asked. Elena smiled without warmth. I get to sleep at night. That's worth something. The four men exchanged looks. Daniel stayed quiet, letting them process. Finally, Jimmy nodded. Okay, I'll try it. Carlos followed. Me too, Ray simply said. Yes. All eyes turned to Marcus. He stood silent for a long moment, jaw tight. Then his shoulders dropped slightly. Fine, but I want it in writing. You'll have a formal offer by Monday, Elena said. The tension that had filled the patio finally began to ease. It wasn't perfect resolution. Too much damage had been done for that. But it was something, a fragile agreement built on exhaustion and slim hope. Marcus stepped toward Daniel and extended his hand. You're all right, Cole. Daniel shook his hand. I need to get back inside before my boss fires me. The four men headed toward the exit. As they filed out, Jimmy stopped and looked back at Elena. Thank you, he said. I know you didn't have to do this. Elena nodded once. Then they were gone. Daniel and Elena stood alone on the patio. The sound of the restaurant filtered through the door, dishes clattering, muted conversation. The normal rhythm of a night that had been anything but normal. You could have called the police, Elena said. Why didn't you? Because I've seen what happens when you treat desperate people like criminals. It doesn't fix anything. That's why you left the force. I left because I stopped trusting myself. Elena studied him with open curiosity. But tonight you trusted yourself? You stepped in, talked them down. Those are the actions of someone who knows what they're doing, or someone who got lucky. I don't think luck had much to do with it. She picked up her phone. Daniel Cole, that's your name? Yes. The waiter who's actually a crisis negotiator. Former crisis negotiator. Current waiter who's about to lose even that job. I'll talk to Mr. Loren. Make sure he understands what happened. You don't need to do that. I know, but I'm going to anyway. She moved toward the door, then stopped. You said you failed? That woman who got hurt. You think that makes you a failure? Daniel didn't answer right away. I think it means I wasn't as good as I thought I was, he said finally. Or maybe it means you were human. Maybe the real failure would have been stopping trying altogether. She opened the door. Thank you for tonight, for showing me something I'd forgotten. What's that? That it's possible to care about people you don't know. She went back inside. Daniel stood alone for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain. His hands were steady now. His breathing even. For 3 years he'd been hiding. Tonight, all of that had come rushing back. And for the first time since he'd turned in his badge, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like himself. Daniel checked the time. 9:45. He texted Lily. I'll be home soon. Had an interesting night. Love you? Then he went back inside to face whatever consequences waited. But when he stepped through the door, he found Elena standing near the host stand, speaking with Mr. Lauren in low tones. The manager's expression had shifted from anger to something closer to understanding. Elena caught Daniel's eye and gave a small nod before collecting her coat. She paused at the door and looked back at him one more time. There was something different in her expression now. Not quite warmth, but maybe the beginning of it. Then she was gone into the night. Mr. Lauren approached Daniel. My office, now. In the cramped office that smelled like old paperwork and espresso, Mr. Lauren gestured to the chair. Daniel sat. Mississippi Park explained the situation, the manager said. 4 men came here to confront her. You moved them outside to prevent a scene. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. Mr. Lauren pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I should fire you. Walking away from your tables, taking aggressive men to our patio. Any of those things would normally be grounds for termination. Daniel nodded, accepting it. But I'm not going to. Mr. Lauren put his glasses back on. Mississippi Park said you potentially prevented a violent situation. She also said if I fired you, she'd stop coming here, and she's one of our best customers. The words landed uncomfortably. Daniel didn't want to keep his job because of economic leverage. I appreciate that, Daniel said carefully. But if you need to let me go, I understand. I've been running restaurants for 30 years. I know the difference between someone causing problems and someone solving them. Mr. Lauren leaned forward. Mississippi Park mentioned you used to be a police officer, community intervention unit, and you left that to wait tables. Daniel had given Marcus the truth earlier. He owed his boss at least some version of it. I made a mistake on the job. Someone got hurt because I didn't act fast enough. I couldn't trust my judgment after that. But tonight you trusted it. Tonight I didn't have a choice. We always have choices. You chose to get involved. The manager stood up. Get back on the floor. We still have an hour left. And Daniel, next time, and I hope there is no next time, you come get me first. Understood? Understood. Daniel left feeling oddly lighter. He cleared Elena's table, noting her half-finished meal and generous tip left in cash. The rest of the shift passed in familiar rhythm, wiping tables, refilling salt shakers, counting tips while Sarah complained about a table that had stayed too long. By 11:15, his feet ached, but his mind felt clearer than it had in months. Walking to his car through the parking garage, Daniel checked his phone. A photo from Lily, a stick figure drawing with, I love you, Dad, written in crayon, and another text from an unknown number. This is Elena Park. Mr. Lauren gave me your contact. I'd like to speak with you when you have time. No pressure, but I have a proposition that might interest you. Daniel stared at the message. Part of him wanted to ignore it. Keep his life simple. But another part was curious. He texted back. I'm free tomorrow afternoon if that works. The response came immediately. 2:00. I'll send you the address. Daniel drove home through empty streets, his mind still replaying the night's events. When he unlocked his apartment door, Mrs. Patterson from across the hall was asleep on his couch with a Korean drama playing softly on the television. She was in her 60s, a retired teacher who'd been watching Lily for 3 years. Daniel gently touched her shoulder. She woke immediately, alert despite the late hour. How was Lily? Daniel asked. Perfect as always. She did her homework. We had dinner. She was in bed by 8:30. Mrs. Patterson gathered her things. How was your night? Daniel thought about the question. Complicated, but okay. Complicated can be good sometimes. Means things are changing. After she left, Daniel looked in on Lily. She was asleep in her small bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and books. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. One hand curled near her face. She looked peaceful in a way that made his chest ache. He pulled the blanket up slightly and kissed her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake. In his own room, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that stepping back was the right choice, that avoiding situations where his judgment mattered was safer for everyone. But tonight had reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Sometimes doing nothing was more dangerous than doing something. He lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept returning to Elena's text. What kind of proposition would a CEO have for a waiter? The next morning, Daniel made pancakes while Lily told him about the drawing she'd made. A family of 3 with a son and a house and flowers everywhere. She didn't mention that the family only had 2 people in real life, just her and him. She always drew 3. Can we go to the park? Lily asked after lunch. I have a meeting first. A meeting on Saturday. Someone wants to talk to me about something. It won't take long. They spent the morning together, easy and comfortable. But as 1:30 approached, Daniel felt his anxiety building. He left Lily with Mrs. Patterson and drove downtown. The address Elena sent led to an office building, glass and steel rising 20 floors. Park Ventures occupied the entire 15th floor. Daniel gave his name to the receptionist and was directed to wait in a sitting area with leather chairs and abstract art that probably cost more than his car. Elena appeared 10 minutes later, dressed more casually than at the restaurant, but still projecting authority, dark jeans, a gray sweater, hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, less like a CEO and more like a person. Thank you for coming, she said, shaking his hand. My office is this way. He followed her through a maze of cubicles and glass-walled conference rooms. Her office sat in the corner with windows overlooking the city. The desk was clean except for a laptop and a single photo frame. Daniel could just make out what looked like a family photo, though he couldn't see the details. Elena gestured to a chair across from her desk, but then moved to sit beside him rather than behind it, creating equality rather than hierarchy. I've been thinking about last night, Elena said. About how you handled that situation. How you saw 4 angry men and didn't just see a threat. You saw people who were hurting. That's what I was trained to do. Most people don't have that training, and even fewer would choose to use it for minimum wage. She leaned forward slightly. I want to offer you a job. Daniel had expected this, but hearing it still felt surreal. I have a job. You have a job that underutilizes your abilities. I'm offering you a position as Community Relations Manager for Park Ventures. Your role would be to interface between our investments and the communities they affect. To be the person who sees the human impact of our business decisions before those decisions get made. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. I'm not qualified for that. I don't have a business degree. I don't know anything about corporate structure. You're qualified because you know how to listen. You know how to de-escalate. You know how to see people instead of problems. Elena pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. This is the position description and compensation package. Take it home. Think about it. No pressure. Daniel opened the folder. The salary made his stomach drop. It was more than triple what he made at the restaurant, enough to move to a better apartment, to save for Lily's college, to stop worrying about every unexpected expense. But the number also terrified him. This wasn't just a job change. This was stepping back into a world where his decisions mattered, where he could fail again. Why me? He asked. You could hire someone with actual experience. Because last night, when 4 men showed up ready to cause harm, you didn't call security or hide. You stepped forward and talked to them like human beings. That's not something you can teach. That's character. Daniel closed the folder, his mind racing. Can I ask you something? Last night on the patio, when you offered those men the training program, was that something you'd been planning, Or did you make that up? Elena smiled slightly. Both. The program exists. We've had it for 2 years, but I'd never once thought about offering it to the people from Morrison Manufacturing until that moment. You made me see them differently. And that's what you want me to do? Make you see people differently? I want you to make sure we don't create more people like Marcus Reed and Jimmy Torres. People who feel invisible and desperate because we couldn't be bothered to consider them. It was compelling. More than compelling, it was everything Daniel had thought he'd lost when he left the police force. A chance to help people, to use his skills for something meaningful. But what if he failed again? What if his judgment was still broken? Elena seemed to read his hesitation. I know you're scared. Last night you told those men about the woman who got hurt. That failure has been defining you. It should define me. I made a mistake with real consequences. And you learn from it. That makes you exactly the kind of person I need. Someone who understands that decisions have weight. She stood up. Take the weekend. Think about it. Call me Monday with your answer. Daniel stood as well, folder in hand. What if I say no? Then I'll respect your decision, and keep coming to Lumiere twice a week. Walking back through the office, Daniel noticed people working even on Saturday afternoon. Young professionals building careers in a world he had deliberately stayed away from. In the elevator down, he looked at the folder again. The job description included phrases like stakeholder engagement and community liaison, corporate language that felt foreign, but underneath it was really asking him to do what he'd done last night: see people, listen to them, help them feel heard. Daniel drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods he used to patrol. The city looked different in daylight, less dangerous, more complicated. At home, Lily was coloring at the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in, her face brightening. Dad, you're home early. He picked her up and spun her around. She was getting too big for it now, almost too heavy to lift. But she still giggled the same way. I had a meeting, Daniel said, setting her down. How's your Saturday? Good. Mrs. Patterson made me pancakes again. Can we go to the park now? Absolutely. They spent the afternoon at the playground 3 blocks away. Daniel pushed her on the swings while she shouted, Higher! And laughed at the sky. Other parents sat on benches, scrolling through phones or chatting. Normal Saturday routines, the kind of simple happiness Daniel had fought to build. But as he watched Lily climb the jungle gym, fearless and confident, he wondered if playing it safe was really the best thing for her. What kind of lesson was he teaching by hiding from challenges? By letting one failure define everything. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with Elena's folder. He read through the job description carefully, then looked at the compensation package again. The salary would change everything, but more than the money, the work itself called to something he tried to bury. He thought about Marcus and Jimmy and Carlos and Ray. 4 men who'd come looking for revenge and left with hope. That transformation hadn't happened because of money or programs. It had happened because someone took the time to listen. What if he could do that as a job? What if he could be the person who stood between business decisions and human consequences? Daniel thought about what Elena had said. Maybe the real failure would have been stopping trying altogether. For 3 years, he'd let one mistake define him. He'd convinced himself that stepping back was noble, that avoiding responsibility was safe. But maybe the real failure was letting that mistake stop him from trying again. He pulled out his phone and looked at Lily's drawing from yesterday, the stick figure family of 3. She always drew 3, even though it was just the 2 of them. Maybe she knew something he'd forgotten. That families could grow. That life could expand beyond the walls you built around yourself. Daniel typed a message to Elena. I don't need the weekend. My answer is yes. He hit send before he could change his mind. The response came 5 minutes later. Welcome to Park Ventures. We'll discuss details Monday. And Daniel, thank you? Daniel set the phone down and looked around his small apartment. The furniture was second-hand. The walls needed painting. The refrigerator made strange noises, but it was safe. It was stable. It was the life he'd built by playing it safe. Starting Monday, that would change. He'd be walking back into a world where his decisions mattered, where his judgment would be tested, where he could fail again. But he'd also be walking towards something he'd lost 3 years ago. The feeling that his life had purpose beyond just surviving. The city lights glowed through his window. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with problems he couldn't see yet. But soon, he'd be in a position to help them, to make sure their voices were heard before they reached the point of desperation. In her bedroom, Lily stirred and called out softly. Daniel went to her, tucked the blanket around her, whispered that he was there. She settled back into sleep, trusting completely that her father would keep her safe. That trust terrified him. But it also reminded him why he couldn't keep hiding. Monday would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new chances to fail. But it would also bring new opportunities to help people, to use the skills he'd been given for something that mattered. Daniel looked at Lily's drawing one more time. The family of 3, the sun, the house, the flowers. Maybe she'd been drawing the future, not the past. Maybe she'd been showing him what could be if he was brave enough to try. He turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe in the darkness. Tomorrow was Sunday. He'd spend it with her, savoring these last hours of the simple life he'd built. Monday, everything would change. But for now, in this quiet moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. He felt ready.